Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Happy Sabbath. I just realized something yesterday that I'm speaking about a flood, and I forgot that there's floods happening on the East Coast. So before I begin, not only would like to pray for myself, but for the people on the East Coast. Dear Heavenly Father, we come before you this Sabbath morning. We want to pray that you'll be with those that are suffering from the floods and the hurricanes that have hit the East Coast. We've seen the devastation. We know that it's nothing like the great flood of Noah's day. But we know it's still devastating for your children who live in all the different parts of that area. So I pray that you will be with them, you will help them in the recovery, and I pray that your glory will be shown in the rescue as to how people can come together and how we are one people under one God. And so I pray that glory, despite all the devastation, that glory will be shown in you, in the responses. And I want to pray that you will fill me with your Holy Spirit, that as I give the message today, that it will be your words and not mine. I pray and ask all this in the name of your Son. Amen.
Amen.
So today's sermon is not so much about a flood, but about faith. And more specifically, faith like Noah. So what do we know about Noah? Anyone? He's the father of what? He built an ark. I think if you talk about Noah, everyone says he built a big ark or a big boat. Well, if you look in Hebrews 11:7, it talks about Noah as, by faith Noah was divinely warned of things not yet seen, but moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. So Noah is a man of great faith. Now, growing up as a kid, I've always, they always talk about Noah in Sabbath school. And they talk about Noah in a funny way. Noah's Arky, where it was a boat full of a bunch of nice, friendly, cuddly animals. And the only problems that he suffered were from the woodpeckers and beavers putting holes in his boat. Well, as you read the story of the Genesis flood and the ark, you realize that it's nothing like that. That it was much bigger, it was deeper, and a lot more destructive, and not quite as fun as that. So if we turn in our Bibles to Genesis 6, we'll start out there, which is talking about the wickedness and the judgment of man. So Genesis chapter 6, starting in verse 1, it starts out as, Now it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, and that they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were men of old, of renown. Now, who those men were, and who exactly were the sons of God versus the daughters of men, that is up for theological debate. There is one side that will say that the sons of God, based on Job 1, that they were fallen angels that came to earth, and they had a relationship with human women, and created this offspring of giants, Nephilim, and all that stuff. And there's also another school of thought, and remember, these are being disputed, is that the sons of God were from the line of Seth. So if you go back to Genesis chapter 5, it talks about the genealogy of Noah, and that Seth was the son of Adam, and from his line all the way down, from Seth, Enosh, Canaan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, all the way down to Noah. That line there is what some would refer to as the sons of God. And the daughters of men, they refer to as the line of Cain, which you can find in Genesis chapter 4. And so whether it was evil angels that united with human women, or whether it was two lines from the line of Adam that intermarried, the point that I want you to take away, because the study as to whether it's this side or that side, that is another sermon, and that's another study, but that's not pertinent to the story of today. But if you go down to Genesis chapter 6, verse 5, then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of the heart was only evil continually. So what that is referring to, it's not referring to a specific sin. Like one sin is worse than another sin. Of course, us humans being on earth, we have different levels of breaking the law. So if you're in a court, you have murder, you got first-degree murder, second, third, manslaughter, involuntary manslaughter. There's a whole slew of laws you can be convicted on depending on how you killed someone. But in the eyes of God, sin is sin. So whether you're a Wall Street banker embezzling money from investors, or whether you're just stealing money from your mom's purse, those are sins. And God does not differentiate between a bigger sin and a littler sin, because sin is sin, and he doesn't want anyone to sin, and he wants you to walk in his ways, to be like him, because when you live according to God's will, you and everyone else around you are a lot happier, and if everyone lives according to that will, this would be a much nicer place. But as we read in verse 5, the earth, and that it was intent, what that means is there was nothing more that God could do to sway the minds of the people to move from their sinful ways, which are in opposition to God, to the ways of God. And so when people don't listen to you anymore and they will not do anything else that you ask them to, what do you do? As he continues on in verse 6, and the Lord was sorry that he had made man on earth, and he grieved in his heart. So if you don't do God's will, eventually he's going to grieve, and there's nothing more he can do. So the Lord said, I will destroy man. So he's talking to Noah. So the Lord said, I will destroy man, whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping thing, and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of God. So what do you think Noah was thinking when God told him this? So Noah gets up every morning. I'm sure he has his devotion, whether that's prayer, reading the scriptures, spending time with his family, and spending time with God. And then in talking to God, God tells him this, that he's going to destroy the earth. But it doesn't stop there. As we skip down into verse 13 of Genesis chapter 6, and God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark, and cover it inside and out with pitch. And this is how you shall make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, its width 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. You shall make a window for the ark, and you shall finish it to a cubit from above, and set the door of the ark in its side. You shall make it with the lower, second, and third decks. And behold, I myself am bringing flood waters to the earth, to destroy from under heavens all flesh, in which is the breath of life. Everything that is on the earth shall die. How do you think Noah's feeling right now? So God said, I'm going to destroy the earth, but I'm going to save you, but I need you to build a giant boat. And this isn't just any boat, this is a huge boat. Now, how big was the ark really? Well, if you go to a place in Williamstown, Kentucky, there is something called the Ark Encounter. And so I was actually just there a couple of weeks ago with my brother and Renee, and we actually got to see the replica of the ark. And it is amazing. It is huge. And so after seeing this, it really put in perspective the undertaking and the magnitude of what Noah really had to do. Now, he told her to make it 300 cubits long, and some other measurements, 50 and 30. So how long is a cubit? So it actually varies. So a cubit is a measurement from your fingertip to the elbow. And so depending on the person building it, it's going to vary. So usually it's a king. So if it's a Filipino ark, it's going to be much smaller than an American ark, just because of the size differential. So this one, they actually used the Hebrew long, which is 20.4 inches. But if you want to talk about the antediluvian world and the giants and people being of bigger stature, it's very probable that the inches, it probably made more like 30 inches, which means the ark would have been much longer than this one you can see in Williamstown, which is 510 feet long. So it's 510 feet long, 88 feet wide, and 51 feet high. And Renee is only 5 feet 2 inches. So that gives you an idea as to when you walk up to the grandeur, the magnitude of how big of an undertaking this really was. And so it took Noah 120 years. So it was him building it along with his family, with his sons eventually, and actually with his father and grandfather, Lamech and Methuselah. Because when you read the genealogy in chapter 5 of Noah, what you're going to find out is that based on, when you do mathematical calculations, Lamech and Methuselah, they were actually alive during the time of construction. Now, they did die before the flood came. So Noah had help from his father, his grandfather. And I just wonder what it was like when Noah came into his family after God told him, I want you to build an ark because I'm going to destroy the earth. I'm going to send flood. I'm going to send rain. They're probably wondering, what is rain? Because when you read in the Bible, it hadn't rained on earth before the flood. In fact, if you look in the book of Genesis chapter 2, verse 6, it talks about the ground being watered by springs welling from the ground. So think of it as like dew or something, or a mist that emanates from the ground. So that has to mean that there's water under a layer of water under the dirt, which is probably under a rock crust. And so the pressure from that pushes through it and causes the springs to water like sprinklers. So the earth back before the flood was much different. Now, if you were here last night, we showed a video, a scientific video on explanations about what the flood was probably like based on the scientific discoveries of fossil records of different dirt layers and how those would have to have come to be with different events posed by a great flood. But as we continue in 17, and behold, I myself am bringing floodwaters on the earth to destroy from under heaven all flesh, which is the breath of life. Everything that is on the earth shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall go into the ark, your sons, your wife, your sons, and wives with you, your sons' wives with you. And of every living thing of flesh you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark, to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female, of the birds after their kind, animals after their kind, everything on the land. And you down to 21, and you shall take for yourselves of all the food that is eaten, and you shall gather it to yourself, and it shall be food for you and for them. And thus Noah did according to all that God commanded him. This is a huge undertaking. I mean, I don't know how you would feel if God said, I want you to build the ark. It's going to take 120 years, and then you need to gather food. Then you need to gather all these animals. And it wasn't just a project he got up day by day. Remember, the world was devolving into anarchy, violence, chaos, mayhem. And so there weren't a whole lot of God-fearing people in the world. And so what happens when God-fearing people meet up with non-God-fearing people? And you want to make your stand for God? It can be intimidating, right? Especially if you are the minority. And Noah and his family and the people from his generational line, they were a minority because a lot of them had polluted themselves with the people of the earth. And they had no intention on doing God's ways. So Noah, preaching for 120 years while building the ark, he was at the disadvantage when it comes to, population-wise. So he had to stand tall day by day. And when you got someone building a giant ship in the middle of dry land, which is probably a couple hundred miles away from the ocean, word's going to get around. And so people from all over would come to check out this, this big ship. Because it's huge, it's big, and why on earth would someone build this in the middle of the land, so far away from the ocean? And so Moses would preach daily to the people about the coming flood. That rain, something that they'd never seen, is going to come, and it's going to wipe out the whole earth. It's very far-fetched. But Noah did not dispute God, and he did according to what God commanded him. Now, if you look at the story of Moses and the burning bush, the commission that God wanted Moses to do was, if you think about it, much simpler. I need you to go to Egypt, tell Pharaoh to let the people go, and I will be with you, and I will help you bring them out. But Moses, he didn't want to do it, and so he made up excuses until God got mad at him, and Moses got scared and said, okay, I'll do it. But Noah, a man of had great faith, so much so that he did not question God on such a big task and undertaking. And as we continue on through the flood, then the Lord said to Noah, come into the ark, you and all your household, because I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. You shall take with you 7 of each, every clean animal, male and female, 2 each of animals that are unclean, a male and his female. Also 7 each of the birds of the air, male and female, keep the species alive on the face of the earth. For after 7 more days I will cause it to rain on the earth, 40 days and 40 nights, and I will destroy from the face of the earth all living things that I have made. So even after 120 years to build the ark, God told him it's time to go in, and God closed the door. So no one could get in, no one could get out. And for 7 days they had to stay in the ark on dry land. What do you think the people outside were doing? They were mocking him. I'm pretty sure they were throwing rocks or stones or beating up the outside of the ark and taunting them because, they are crazy. I mean, rain, flood. This had never happened in over 1,000 years since the creation from the fall of Adam. The earth, even though God cursed the ground, the earth was not what we see today. It was actually far more glorious. There was a lot more vegetation. It was beautiful, even in its fallen state. And the antediluvian people back then, living for hundreds, some even reaching thousands of years, as you read in the genealogies, they had time to learn. And they learned more and more and more. So think about if Albert Einstein could live to be 900 years old. Imagine how many more discoveries he could have made. How many more advancements in physics, astrophysics, space, and science, and what he discovered of the atom could he have made in 900 more years? Well, that's the kind of people that the antediluvians were. They were very smart, and they had centuries to learn, to build on that knowledge. And everything God gave them, all the gifts God gave them, they exploited for personal gain. And they invented some really bad things with their knowledge, which that's a whole other presentation on what the antediluvian world was like. But they were given gifts by God, and they destroyed it. And so now the floodwaters are coming on the earth. And, when you're in Sabbath school, they say it rained 40 days and 40 nights, which is true. But one thing you got to realize is there was more than just rain that was coming down. And as we fast forward, we're going to go down to verse, if you go down to verse 11 of chapter 7, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day, the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. So what are the fountains of the deep? Remember how I said that the earth, there was no rain, and that the earth was watered from underneath. Well, all that water that was so it's probably a layer of water under rock, which would go through the ground and come up. Those burst open. So we're talking about billions of gallons, just all the pressure being broken up. And we're talking rock shooting in the air hundreds of feet high, coming down, destroying buildings, hitting people, and just gushers, just flowing up. And that wasn't just on land, but that was also in the ocean, because it talks about the great deep. And so what happens when you have the earth's crust tearing apart and pressures changing all over? What's going to happen? Tsunamis. So we all know about plate tectonics, right? We know that the earth has different plates and they move. And when they move too fast, or if they or if they get stuck and there's a quick release, we get an earthquake. Well, this was happening in regular cycles. So not only was water coming down from heaven when the floodgates of heaven opened, not only was water gushing from the ground, but tsunamis from the ocean were washing over. And we're not talking about stuff like you see, this is Japan, the one that struck back in 2012, I think. We're talking like walls of water that would cover not only the west coast, but it go past, think about it going past California, going past Nevada, Oregon, Utah, Idaho, going that far in, and then the water would come back out, and then you have another one that would come in and come out, and this was happening all over the world. So this is not just a standard flood. I mean, this is earthquakes, this is tsunami, this is lava eruptions, because we know that magma under the earth, that was released too. And so you got volcanoes popping up. You got, it's bad. It's apocalyptic. And this went on for, well, it rained for 40 days, but the flood lasted an entirety. Well, there's a couple different timelines that you need to know. So the whole flood from start to finish lasted about a year. So Noah got into the ark, and by the time he was able to get out, it was pretty much a year past that they were in the ark. Now, it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. That's just water coming up. And then it was flooded for 150 days. So that was at the peak when there was just water on the earth. That was 150 days, and then it took time for the waters to recede, to go back into oceans, for various volcanic activity, to move earth up, to create basins to where the water could recede into. And then it had to be absorbed into the ground, which had to reconstitute because it was all ripped apart, which is where you'll find fossils of like shells and fishes in high mountain elevations like, I believe it's Utah, because water actually made it up that high and they were deposited. And so after all that was said and done, it was a year. I can only imagine how difficult it must have been, because when we went to the Noah's Ark, we actually got inside and it's pretty big. But also it smelled. You got the wood smell. And then you got to add animals to it. And I'm sure they stunk. And then animals, what do? They eat and go to the bathroom, and then you got to dispose. It's a cycle. And then you got to dispose of that. And so how do you dispose of it in an ark that is long? I mean, you're working every single day. It's quite an experience. But I don't think they were complaining too much after the whole world was wiped out and they were in a boat. And that took a lot of faith for Noah to do that. And the people of that world, I bet they wished, they'd gotten on the boat. I know when we were there at the Noah's Ark in Kentucky, it was sprinkling, kind of raining. And so we're like, oh, well, this is a really authentic experience. We're walking towards the ark. Then you go to the ticket center, then you got to get on the shuttle bus. The shuttle bus takes you down. And even from the ticket center, the ark is huge. I mean, you can just see it like a mile or two away. And as you get down there, it starts to rain harder and harder to where it was raining cats. I'll just say cats and dogs. But I mean, it was drenching, and we're running. We're running to the ark, and we got lucky that day because they let us in. I was drenched, but I was in the ark, and we were able to come in out of the rain. But these people were not so lucky because they waited too long. They did not have enough faith to get into the ark and to be saved. They wanted the things of this world more than they wanted the things of God. Because as we all know, the things of this world are a lot more exciting, right? It excites the senses a whole lot more than just that nice, calm relationship with God. And if you go to Matthew 24 to close here, this talks about the end of the world. And so this is starting in Matthew chapter 24, starting in verse 3. Now as he sat on the Mount of Olives, meaning Jesus, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will the things be, and what will the signs of your coming and the end of the age?" And Jesus answered and said to them, "Take heed that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, saying, 'I am Christ,' and will deceive many. And you will hear of wars, rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet." Do we hear a lot of rumors of wars? Every day it seems like some other country is mad at another country. "For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines, pestilences, earthquakes in various places." Are kingdoms rising against kingdoms? Yes. I know Mexico and U.S., we have this trade thing going on, and then there's Canada, and it just seems like there's all this strife being caused by the politicians. And as we continue on, all these things are the beginning of sorrow. I know a couple weeks ago there was an earthquake in Milpitas. Anyone feel that? I felt it, and I don't feel earthquakes. I sleep right through them. But I was sitting at my dining room table, I was looking out, and I hear a bang. And as I look out the window, I see something. It was like a disturbance. And it got closer, then all of a sudden my house started shaking, and boom! That was a shock wave hitting me. And I was, it actually did kind of scare me. Well, startle me. I wasn't scared, I was startled. And then it stopped. And as it keeps going on, then many will be offended, will betray one another, and will hate one another. Do you see a lot of hate going on today? Then many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. Anyone follow Twitter? Is it a social media site of a lot of love or a lot of hate? A lot of hate. And it's growing worse and worse by the day. But he who endures to the end shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations. And then the end will come. How much more time do you think we have? I can't imagine, I'd say less than 5 years. At the rate things are going, I don't know the exact day, no one knows when he's coming, but it's getting bad. But the big question is how much time do you have? Because let's say he comes in 2 years. What if something happens to you in 1 year? What if something happens to you in 6 months and you're not ready? That's the end of it. So the question I want to leave you with today is, how is your faith? Dear Heavenly Father, we come before you this Sabbath service. You know the struggles we face in life. You know how difficult life can be. We get caught up with work because we need the money to pay the bills so we have a roof over our heads. You know, there's a lot of us that have kids, and trying to raise them in a world that is growing more depraved by the day is a greater challenge. So I pray that you'll be with the parents here, that you will help empower them to be able to deal with all these problems head on, and that they will be able to be a good example to the kids. And I pray for the rest of us here that we will seek you earnestly every day, that we will be able to let the things of this world grow strangely dim, because it's dying. We see it all around us. Governments are dying, and what's going to happen is, you said in Revelation that a new order is coming. And we know that it's going to be your new order, but before that, something else is going to rise. And so I pray that we will not be caught up in it, that we will stay strong to you in what little time we have left. Be with us today, and I pray and ask all this in the name of your Son. Amen.
Amen.